Hi everyone, Vincent here. I'm a senior software developer on the Microsoft Graph SDK team, and today I'm going to talk about Project Kiota. So before I talk about Project Kiota, I have to talk about how do we ship SDKs today and how do we make SDKs available to you so you can use them in your applications. First and foremost, we have different services like SharePoint, OneDrive, Exchange, and many more that put together something called a CSDL. CSDL is a document that allows those different services saying, hey, I have an entity that's a drive item. It's going to be at this and that place in the API, and it's going to behave this and that way, contain those different fields. It's a way for us as Microsoft, but also for you to understand what's the shape of the APIs and what do they contain. So they work on that, and they work with the API Council to design and build a clean and lean API surface and document that API using a CSDL document. Once we have that CSDL document, we, the SDK team, take it and put it in a tool called TypeWriter, which parses that CSDL document, understands the different OData conventions, use different T4 templates to actually generate the SDKs, because most of the SDK that you're using are actually generated. They are not handwritten because the API is way too large and it would take us too much time to handwrite all of that for each and every language. So that's what happens on the one hand. On the one hand, we use TypeWriter with the CSDL, and that gives us SDKs. But of course, we want to make sure those SDKs are up to standards, they are good quality. So we have a second tool called the DevX API that generates the snippets in the documentation. It also generates the code snippets when you use Graph Explorer. And this is how you get from an HTTP request on Microsoft Graph to a code sample, a code snippet in .NET, Java, or any other language. So we use that second tool and the CSDL again to generate the different snippets in the documentation. And once we have both the snippets and the SDKs, we use both the SDK in combination with the snippets, and we try to compile the snippets against the SDKs to make sure that the generations are aligned, things are working as expected, and so on and so forth. And if Raptor gives us a green light, Raptor being the process that compiles the snippets against the SDKs, this is when we say, all right, this newer version of the SDK that has the latest and greatest version of the API and provides the latest and greatest entities and Fluent API and so on and so forth actually works. We can release it in the open, and this is how you get it. So as you can see, it's a fairly complex process today, and it requires some knowledge about OData and CSDL, which is not super popular and easy to understand. So it makes it a bit hard for the community to contribute here. Some other challenges that we're facing: the OData complexity leaks in the different templates, and by that I mean specific conventions, instead of being understood and planned for and parsed for, are at one place. They are being done in different templates for the different languages. So we duplicate the effort here. The T4 templates themselves are great, but the lack of tooling, they induce some kind of duplication. It is really hard for open source contributors that don't have prior experience to understand how they work and what to do with it, and they're kind of slow as well. And another challenge that we have, and feedback that we've heard from the community, from you guys, is that having an SDK is great, but our SDKs, because Microsoft Graph is getting larger and larger and larger and larger, are getting big and monolithic. So this is not so much a problem for backend APIs on servers that have tons of space and so on, but it might become a challenge for mobile APIs or front-end mobile applications, or front-end applications, where you want to trim down the size of the application so it's easier to distribute to the end user. So that's another challenge. Today we are only able, via that tool, to ship SDKs for the full API, not a subset. Also, the feedback from the tests comes very late. Instead of having unit testing very early on to test on the conventions and other things like that, we actually rely on Raptor that is at the end of the process to get the tests and to get the feedback from the generation process. Did it work? Did it produce something that was expected? And that slows down our ability to innovate and make major changes. And lastly, all that tooling is great, but it only works for Microsoft Graph, which means that if you have an API of your own, or if we want to use it for other APIs, well, all that tooling cannot work with those different set of APIs. So now let's talk about Project Kiota. So we still have the services that are OneDrive, SharePoint, Exchange, and many more that are building that CSDL description of the service and the APIs. And now we have a tool that's provided by the OpenAPI community that allows us to convert that CSDL document into an OpenAPI description. So for those of you that don't know about OpenAPI, OpenAPI is this standard that's been around for a couple of years now. It used to be called Swagger a long time ago, and it's a way of a standardized way that's broadly adopted to describe your API and to say, all right, my API has all those endpoints, they accept those different parameters, they respond that different type of response with a schema and so on and so forth. So again, we are able to, thanks to that community, to describe our API Microsoft Graph in a standard way, and also to convert existing description into OpenAPI. Once we have that OpenAPI document, we feed it into Kiota that I'm going to show you in just a few minutes, and we use that to generate SDKs. If we talk about the high-level architecture before we dive into the code, again, we have this OpenAPI document that comes in. Kiota has a builder, so that builder uses the OpenAPI libraries and parses the document thanks to that, and generates a code dump. So a little bit like you have web browsers that have that generate a code dump from the HTML they receive to understand all the different elements that are on the page and what they need to display on the screen for the user and those different things. Well, we kind of have the same mechanism, but for code. This code dump is a very high-level, abstract notion of, hey, we need a class, or hey, we need a method, or hey, we need a property within that class, and so on and so forth. And we describe at a very high level, abstracted, all the things we need to generate in the SDK. Once we have that code dump, we use it and we feed it into the language refiner, which is a way for us to flavor that code dump in a .NET kind of way, or flavor that code dump in a TypeScript kind of way, or flavor again in different languages. Why are we doing that? Well, some languages support more or less features. They are capable of doing different things, and we want to make sure that the code dump that we feed to the writer is most adapted to that specific language. And then we pass it on to the writer, which is going to take that flavored code dump and actually write the different files and generate the different SDK in the desired language. A few advantages. So as we've seen, the OData conventions are abstracted away by the OpenAPI conversion step. So that's something that we are not responsible for anymore. That's the OpenAPI and the OData communities that are doing that for us. It's more robust. It's at one place. There is no more duplication anymore. We have a very testable generation process. That was kind of one of the key requirements, or kind of a key design we had in mind. And the idea was that we wanted to design and build a generator that's easy to test and to unit test, so we can get feedback very early on and iterate on that feedback very early on rather than later in the process. We don't have any duplication within the languages. If I want to define how do I write a method in Java, I only do it once at one place in the writer, and then it's been reused whenever it's needed. But we don't have duplication of what is a method, how I define the accessibility of that method, and so on and so forth anymore within the languages. It is done once per language. It's going to be easier to contribute to, and the reason is because we're relying on plain .NET. There is no T4 anymore. The tooling support is great, and it's easier to understand for community members. We are also going to be able to ship modular SDKs. So part of the vision is to give you a way to say, hey, I want to have only the mail things for Microsoft Graph, because my application will only do that. I don't care about the files. I don't care about, I don't know, the security policies or anything like that, because my application is not going to touch that. So I'm going to select those different aspects and those different endpoints in some kind of tool that will provide you, and then you'll be able to generate your own SDK for your application using Kiota for just that smaller part of Microsoft Graph, which will be super appreciated by mobile applications or front-end applications or other kind of applications like that. And thank you for all the hearts and the claps. It also will work with any API that has an OpenAPI description. So we're building the tool in a way that it works first for Microsoft Graph and the SDKs that we're building. But if you have in-house APIs, and if those APIs have an OpenAPI description, you'll be able to use Kiota, feed in that OpenAPI description instead, and get a Fluent SDK in the language of choice for that specific API. And lastly, it's also plug and play. We received feedback that some people prefer this or that JSON serializer, for example, or some people prefer this or that HTTP client. So it is also designed in a way that we have a high level of abstraction. We'll provide, of course, default implementations, but the idea is that we also make it possible for people to say, hey, I don't like your default implementation. I want to build mine, and I want to plug mine instead. So that's the idea that we have. And with that, I'm going to jump into the demo and share my screen. So here I have Kiota, and before we dive into Kiota itself, I have this OpenAPI description here. It's rather lengthy, and we don't need to go over the details, but that's a description that we use, for example, to generate the partial SDKs today. And the idea is that description only contains mails things. So things about sending emails, getting the emails from Microsoft Graph, getting the attachments, all those different things. It doesn't contain anything else than things that are related to Microsoft Graph messages capabilities. And it's effectively a subset of Microsoft Graph. And so that's the first thing. In terms of how Kiota is built, well, we do have a few things here. First, we have a generator that's contained in the source folder. And you'll see that, as I mentioned, we have different constructs for the code DOM. So what is a namespace, what is a method, what is a class, and those different things. But we also have different writers for the different languages, for TypeScript, Java, and C# here as well, and the different writers for the different languages here that are available. And finally, we also have the builder that I was mentioning earlier that takes in the OpenAPI description, parses it, generates the code DOM, calls the different refiners and the different writers to generate the SDK. So that's a high-level overview of how Kiota works. I'm going to fire off a generation and show you what you get out of it. And before I do that, here I have this other project, which is TypeScript Starter for a Node.js application. I chose TypeScript for today, and I chose a Node.js application for today as well. But this would work in a browser. This would work in .NET or in Java as well. Those are the three languages we're supporting today. So I'm going to go ahead and clear the part that is being generated here, as you can see. There we go. And I'm going to start the generation. So I've set up Kiota I've set up my environment to be able to generate things. So here you can see that I'm calling Kiota, not for Java, for TypeScript. Here you can see that I'm calling Kiota. I'm passing it the OpenAPI description. I'm saying, hey, I want a TypeScript thing, and please put all the files here. And here's the namespace, even though it's not namespace in TypeScript, that I want you to generate things in as well. So I'm going to kick off the generation process. You'll see that very quickly it will go ahead, parse the OpenAPI description, generate the code dump, refine it, and write all the different files. So again, all of that is going through the OpenAPI description, generating a code dump, parsing, refining that code dump in a TypeScript flavor, and then calling the writer to write all the different files to the local storage. And there we go, generation is finished. So again, within a few seconds, and keep in mind that me sharing my screen and so on impacts the performance of my computer, we were able to generate an SDK for the messages subset of Microsoft Graph. So here you can see that all the things that I had previously deleted are back. And one great thing about Kiota is we try to make it so what we generate is easy to map with the API. So you'll see that the folders or the namespace segmentation is very close to what you find in the API. We know that messages, for example, are attached to users or are under users or groups, of course, on the Microsoft Graph API. So you can see that under users, I have a message entity here. I also have for the messages, the different request builders and the different things. And all of that is segmented in a way that is very similar to the API to understand how we can, how this code and how the things that are being generated map to the API itself. So now if we jump into the application, my actual application, you can see that the first thing I'm doing here is I'm using Azure Identity to get the token and to authenticate against Microsoft Graph. I'm passing that authentication provider to the core provider. So again, that's one of the things we've implemented by default. We've implemented a way using fetch to talk to Microsoft Graph behind the scenes. All of that probably needs a bit of cleanup to provide a Fluent API for the configuration, but all of that is plug and play. So that comes from our core library. So you can pass the authentication provider in our HTTP core provider, and then you take the client that has been generated locally, and you pass it also the serialization factory. Again, all of that will be cleaned up in the future, and the core thing, all of that is plug and play as well, as I mentioned, and you're ready to go. You're ready to use the API. So here, what do I have? Let me just, because I made it bigger. Here you can see that if I do client dot control space, you'll see that I get my Fluent API. So I get users. I can get all the users if I want. Or if I want to get a single user, I can get a single user. You can see I get auto completion. I get the different things that are available again. I get the documentation, inbox, and so on and so forth. And finally, when I'm ready to make my mail folders by ID. Finally, when I'm ready to make my request, I can do .get if I want to get things, .post if I want to create things, and so on and so forth. All of that returns promises in TypeScript. It returns futures in Java and tasks in .NET. And if we go ahead and actually debug that application, you'll see that it will build the application and it will start debugging the application in a few seconds. There we go. So here it's telling me, hey, because I'm using the device code flow, but again, it's because of Azure Identity, it would work with any kind of flow for the backend, for the front end, for anything you want to do. And here I'm going to Chrome with my debugging profile, entering the code, signing in, and that's it. I'm ready to use my app that I'm showing to you here. So if we get back here, I have a breakpoint that stopped here. So you can see that what happened here. Using the Fluent API, I used my client. I got my own user here. I got a specific message with a specific ID, and I executed the request with a .get. Here, if I can hover, you can see that I have my deserialized message with all the different properties, with sub-properties. Eventually, it all deserializes recursively that are available. And here, then, I'm using this message, I'm getting the subject, I'm logging in. Also, I'm doing the same thing for the recipients, so you will see it in the console appearing. And the second thing I wanted to show you is we also have serialization, of course. So here I'm creating a new message. Oops, sorry about that. I'm creating a new message. I'm setting the different properties I want to set. All of that, again, supports auto-completion because we're using TypeScript. And here I'm using the default serializer that's provided to actually serialize the message that I could eventually send or do anything with on the wire. We also support enumerations. We support collections, of course, and many, many other things. And here you can see in the console that I have my serialized payload here with the different properties that's ready to send to Microsoft Graph. With that, I'll get back to the slides to handle questions and eventually give it to the next presenter.
Thanks, Vincent. This is very interesting stuff. And it's great to see the demo, right? I think it really helps capture what Project Kiota is all about. One quick question, how would people get started with this? Like if they want to get involved and contribute to the project as well, like where would they go?
Sure, that's my next slide. So if you want to get started with Kiota, one place to go, github.com/Microsoft/Kiota, that's KIOTA. And there you can do a couple of different things. We still have a couple of pull requests to merge and clean up, but you can go and try Kiota either on your own API or on Microsoft Graph and give us feedback around that. You can also tell us your expectations about TypeScript Fluent API, because one of the first things we're trying to tackle via Kiota is to make sure you get a Fluent API for TypeScript, because we know that's been a consistent request for the past few years, let's say. So if you have expectations in terms of a TypeScript Fluent API, what it should look like, how it should behave, all those different things, it is feedback we want to hear about. It is things we want to discuss with you about. So we make sure we build the greatest TypeScript Fluent API. And with that, if there are no questions, I'll hand it to the Microsoft Graph Toolkit team to tell us more about their new features and new capabilities. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Vincent.